the Navajos were using new tactics against the Apache raiders that slipped in and out of their territory with ease. Now, when the Apache trespassed into Navajo country to steal horses or women, the Navajo would divide their force, and while one group attacked the interlopers, another would dash south to block their exit over the Mogollon Rim. This worked well for a time, but then the Apache began disappearing into the landscape without a trace. To the Navajo warriors blocking the escape route, it would appear that the Apache would just simply vanish into thin air. One winter they discovered the secret, though, of how the Apache were getting away without a trace. During the winter of 1878, Apaches struck at a number of hogans, or Navajo dwellings, at dawn in the Melgosa Desert. All the men, women, and children were killed except for 3 young girls who were taken prisoner. At the same time, a second raiding party hit more hogans near Garces Mesa. Navajo warriors, Natani, Buogetin, and Red Shirt raced south with 25 other warriors to get ahead of the raiders and wait in ambush. They lay in wait along trails on the Mogollon Rim, but the Apaches did not come, and once again the Navajo war party started home without tasting revenge. As they were traveling, scouts were sent out in an attempt to locate the elusive enemy before they escaped again. 2 scouts, Buogetin Begay and Bahay, proceeded to Two Guns, a location that had been occupied for centuries because of the landscape that made crossing Canyon Diablo easy. In the late afternoon, they stealthily approached by crawling through the sagebrush towards the rim, getting into position to watch for the Apache raiders. As Bahay crawled up to the rim, he was shocked when hot air came up from the ground and the muffled sound of Apache voices reached his ears. Startled, he found a crevice in the earth that led down to a cave or cavern. Rushing to their ponies, the 2 scouts raced back to the main body of warriors with the news of the contact. The war party arrived just as night fell, and the Navajos took up positions around the cave and blocked all the routes of escape. The Navajo crept up to the entrance to the cave and shot 2 Apache guards just outside. Much excitement was heard from inside the cave after their comrades had been shot. No doubt they had felt safe in this well-hidden hiding place. The Navajo warriors gathered dry sagebrush and driftwood and dropped it down into the narrow passage leading to the cave mouth. The Apache realized what was happening, and they bravely attacked the Navajos from the narrow entrance in attempts to drive the Navajos off, but they were driven back inside by warriors shooting from above. When the brush and wood filled the passageway, a flaming torch was dropped down and the dry heap erupted in fire. The smoke and the fumes were so great that they were sucked into the cave and reappeared from several cracks on the plateau. The Apaches tried to extinguish the fire at the cave mouth, but couldn't without being shot. The Apache leader called out in broken Navajo to try to negotiate a surrender with payment of horses and goods, but the Navajo first asked that the 3 girls be released. At this request, the Apache went quiet, and the Navajos now knew that the captives had already been killed. The Navajo warriors could hear the enemy singing their death song, but after a while the chanting stopped and no sound could be heard coming from the cave. The fire was allowed to go out, but the smoldering embers made it just too hot to investigate until the next day. As the Navajo eventually cleared the entrance, they found the Apaches had butchered their ponies and had stacked them up close to the entrance to try to stop the smoke. As the warriors pulled apart the wall of pony flesh, they discovered the bodies of 42 Apaches. The Navajo warriors set about the work of recovering plunder that had been stolen in the earlier raid and left the grisly scene as quickly as they could. Although the Apache would still raid into Navajo country, they never used the cave system or that route again. The area is now popular with treasure hunters because in 1889, 4 cowboys from the Hash Knife Ranch robbed the train at Canyon Diablo and got away with $140,000 in gold, silver, and diamonds. A posse captured the 4 men after a short pursuit. These men were sent to prison for years, and on release, one of the men confessed they had buried the gold somewhere on the canyon rim at Two Guns. As far as anyone knows, The treasure has never been found.
My father taught me how to use the bow and arrow, and also how to ride a horse, and soon it became natural for me to ride. I soon grew to be able to use the bow and arrow that my father used. With it, I killed buffalo. My father taught me to pity the old men and women, and when I went on the warpath to be brave, and even try to die on the field. My father also taught me that it was better to go on the field of battle and have my body filled with arrows from the enemy and die on the field, and let the wolves come and eat up my flesh and bones, rather than be wrapped up and buried in some high tree. And in this spirit, I went forth into all my fights. I remember when I was very young, I went on the warpath and carried the bundles of moccasins and provisions for the war party. When I was 15 years old, I went with my first war party. The snow was very deep and hard, so that the horses slipped round. We charged upon the Assiniboines. I remember when we charged the camp, we found one Indian down in the creek trapping foxes. We did not know he was there. As soon as he saw us, he ran toward his own camp, and I whipped up my horse and ran after him. The enemy came out with guns and bows and arrows. I ran the man clear into the midst of the smoke. I came back without even myself or my horse getting hurt. That is how I got my name. Runs the enemy. I was then at the age of 15. When we got back to camp, the Sioux people said, I did not know what I was doing. And I replied that I knew that was what my father had taught me. I performed this deed in the face of a lot of brave warriors, and this is how my name is great among the Sioux. There was a lifelong enmity between the Sioux and the Assiniboines. My father was wounded by the Assiniboines, and I made up my mind I was going to do something to that tribe. I have been in about 40 battles altogether. Rather insignificant, some of them, but about 10 great battles. When I was about 18, a band of Sioux, including myself, went down to the Black Rees. They greatly outnumbered us. We attacked them, but did not kill any of them. They pursued us a long way, killing 5 of our number. My horse was hit with an arrow, and I jumped off, and while I was running, I was shot through the ankle with an arrow. The enemy surrounded me. My own friends had gone on. I crossed my wounded ankle over the other foot and defended myself as best I could. I looked at the ground and the sky and made up my mind that this was my last day. Just at this moment, while I was surrounded by my enemies, one of my friends was brave enough to come back. He rode into the midst of our foes and put me on the back of his horse, and we rode away in safety. Let me tell you about my connection with the Battle of the Little Rosebud. With my war party, I joined the Sioux camp on the Rosebud River. We camped first at Lame Deer. When I arrived at the Sioux camp at Lame Deer, we were near the Cheyenne camp, and the Cheyennes had built a big bonfire. They were singing and dancing around the fire. I was told that there were some Cheyennes that had reached camp that day or the day before from the Black Hills, and they brought the news that the soldiers were coming. The reason for the campfire and the dancing was to pick out the bravest of the Cheyennes and send them back to find out the location of the troops and bring back word. The campfire was so big and so bright, and the dancing and shooting so boisterous, that I went over to the Cheyenne camp to see for myself. And I saw them choosing the braves for this scouting duty. The scouts must have numbered 10. They started right off on their mission. The next morning we broke camp and came over the hills. We camped about half a day's journey from the Custer battlefield. That night, after we camped, there was no news, and I went to bed and went to sleep. The next morning I was awakened by firing, and the report came to me that there was going to be trouble, for the troops were coming. Almost at once, everybody who could ride a horse or hold a gun mounted his horse and rode away to meet the troops. The Cheyenne scouts led the way. It was not very long until I heard the report of rifles over in the gully. After the report of the guns, we heard a cry from the hilltop. An Indian was on the hill crying as hard as he could, telling us to make the charge at once. Then one of their number was killed outright. The occasion of the shots was that 4 or 5 of our Sioux had gone around us and had gone into the soldiers' camp and stolen some horses, and the soldiers were firing at the horse thieves. 4 of them escaped, 1 being killed. This was the screaming we heard. We no sooner heard it than we made a dash. I cannot tell you the number of our Indians. There were the different bands of the Sioux, and the entire tribe of the Cheyennes. The charge we made was enough to scare anybody. As we got on top of the hill, the soldiers, who were already after the horse thieves, knowing that we outnumbered them, all fled back. The cavalry, supported by a file of infantry, stopped, and we also stopped and had a great battle there. We simply circled them and did not give them a chance to charge, as we greatly outnumbered them. We killed a great many soldiers, shot down a good many of their horses, for there were lots of them lying on the ground, wounded and dead. This battle the Indians called the Battle of the Wolf Mountains, known to the soldiers and the Crows by this name, and to the Sioux as the Battle of the Head of the Rosebud. The general sentiment was that we were victorious in that battle, for the soldiers did not come upon us, but retreated back into Wyoming. We understood that General Crook was in command of the United States troops, led by Crow Scouts. They called General Crook 3 stars. When our Indians made the charge upon the United States troops, we found the Crow Scouts standing between us and the troops. If it had not been for the Crow Scouts, we would have charged right through to the soldiers. The Crow Scouts were in between us and received the fire from both sides. After the battle ended and the soldiers returned, we got home to our camp without any fear. We spent the whole of the next day in camp at the Little Rosebud, and the day after, we came over onto the plains by the Custer battlefield. Runs the enemy.